You are here for the second day of the One Planet Polar Summit, which we have organized with Paul Bertrand Barretz and all of his team. And I'd like to suggest that we give them a round of applause, all the team, for their organizational work. And you can boo them later if you think the organization wasn't good, but I think for the time being we can agree that things are going quite well. This is the second day. I think we've done quite a bit of work. We'll get feedback from you on your opinion. We have done our best. We heard from the President of the Republic suggesting that we organize this. He suggested this back in July, and he suggested we organized the summit in October. Well, it was hard to find people who were available as we just started looking in July. So I started calling around to my friends, and my friends are here. Jérôme Saplaz, who is a professor in Lausanne, a bit Swiss and a bit French, because he was director of the French Polar Institute, and Antje Botus, who is the director of the Alfred Wegener Institute in Bremerhaven, Germany. And the two of them accepted, without perhaps understanding what a big job it was, to oversee this scientific part of this summit. And perhaps they will introduce the whole scientific team that's been working very hard for the last month and a half. Then we'll hear from, I called Pascal Lamy. Pascal Lamy made many contributions and enabled me to organize One Planet Summit within the Paris Peace Forum, which, as you know, is a very important forum with peace being threatened as it is now, and there will be a humanitarian conference there's a conference being held right now for humanitarian aid to Gaza. And Pascal Lamy has agreed to speak to our session today, and we're looking forward to that. We also thought it was important to have the presence of NGOs, environmental activists who've talked a lot about the Antarctic and the Arctic. And I'd like to thank the two speakers who are Jean-Jacques Ponce and Émile Dedieu, who will be speaking to you as well. And then Geneviève Ponce and Émile Dedieu. Then when we're looking at glaciers and the poles, it's important to have experts in that field. And also we have experts in logistics, because when you're working at the poles, you need a lot of logistic help. So we have a British speaker who will be talking about the logistics of undertaking scientific experiments at the poles. And then we have the Paulsen Foundation. They gave 10 million euros for French and French-speaking research yesterday. And then to conclude, we will hear from the coalition that was launched this morning by Christophe Béchu, Minister of the Environmental Transition, with the Indian Minister of Science, who is arriving here, and Christian Estrosi, who was charged with organizing this coalition. So, I would just like to ask you one small favor. I just have spoken for about 3 minutes, so we'd like to ask all of you to keep your speeches short. 2 minutes, 30 seconds is good. After 3 minutes, neurologists tell us that our attention tends to wander. So try to be brief. And for those of you who are listening, thank you for your attention. Thank you all for being here. We're starting on a very studious but joyful afternoon. Pascal will be telling you a bit about how this will be organized, and then I'll be introducing the other speakers. Thank you, Olivier. Thank you all for being here. I will try to stick to my 3 minutes to say 3 things. The first thing is that the purpose of this summit, which Olivier Poivre d'Abord was kind enough to say was decided on by the President of the Republic. I could perhaps say a bit more about that, but I'll refrain at this point. We are looking at the question of the cryosphere, which is important when we're looking at the rapid degradation of ecosystems around the world. The cryosphere has a more important place than that it has been given up until now. If we can bring the cryosphere back into the central focus of our concerns, I think we will have succeeded. The second point is our method. I gave you a brief explanation of that yesterday as we began our works. It's very simple. The method is to successively go through 4 phases that will lead us from the idea to the reality: science, conscience, awareness, policy, and action. Since yesterday, we have worked on the first 2 phases, science and awareness. Science, of course, with scientists, awareness, that is, members of civil society, NGOs, explorers, other specialists, and all those who have influence, including, and we've seen this a lot over the past 2 days, indigenous populations who have a very important role to play. And often they can be much more effective in terms of changing opinions, more effective than scientists, who sometimes come across as a bit dry. So we looked at science, awareness, and then we come to the third point, which is policy, and that is your domain. So we'll be looking at policy this afternoon at your level, and tomorrow we'll be looking at the next level up. All that will be left then is action, which is of course the essential thing, but we know through experience that action can only be produced after the first 3 phases have been successfully accomplished, one after the other. And here I will conclude. Olivier just mentioned that you would tell us if we had done our job well. I think it's more the opposite. I think we will tell you tomorrow afternoon if you have worked well. So I wish you a good working session.
Merci, Pascal. To introduce Sylvie Rotaillot, who is Minister for Higher Education, Science and Innovation, no? Science. Please, Sylvie.
Merci beaucoup, Olivier.
Thank you very much, Madam European Commissioner for Innovation, Research, Culture, Education and Youth, dear Jana, Mr. Christophe, dear ambassadors, ladies and gentlemen. I am really honored to be here speaking before you today as we try to think about and offer solutions for the great challenges that are so urgent today. With Christophe Béchu, I think we are talking about the same subjects like the cryosphere, for example, the problem of the polar ice caps, the glaciers in high altitudes. All of these questions are playing an essential role today in climate regulation, but also in conservation or preservation of life on our planet. We know that human activity has had an impact on climate change. As the last IPCC report has said, this is the main factor for the reduction of ice in the Arctic Sea and also for the general withdrawal of glaciers around the world. It has also resulted in lessening of the snow coverage, in particular in the northern hemisphere. We are losing the delicate balance of our environment, and there are strong consequences, major consequences on our economies, our societies, and the life of native peoples who live in these areas, but also, and we can see this through youth, and the future generations will be strongly impacted by these changes. The cryosphere is changing, and this impact is felt around the world and requires a collective response. And this is why we have come together today. We all share a common responsibility, which is to protect natural resources of the planet and also to ensure a sustainable future for everyone. And when I say everyone, I mean humans and also other living creatures. This is the challenge that science and scientific cooperation must meet, and we are strong in that regard. Science provides knowledge so that we can understand complex interactions within the cryosphere. We can forecast the consequences of climate change and other changes, but we can also develop solutions, innovative solutions, and we can make enlightened decisions with regard to policy. Scientific knowledge shared amongst our different countries takes account of the knowledge of local communities as well and native peoples. And I think this point is also essential. Essential in order to shape policies for mitigating climate change and reducing all risks, reinforcing the efficiency of adaptation measures that are adapted. When we talk about scientific cooperation, I would like to give you an example of 4 European projects that display this cooperation in polar sciences, working with 3 other countries, the United States, Canada, Mona, countries from the Indo-Pacific region, South Africa, India, of course, Korea, of course, the UK, with whom we share many projects. These projects, this is the EU PolarNet 2 project, seeking to optimize the use of polar infrastructures and to establish new partnerships. And there's also the Ocean Ice Project, which seeks to evaluate the impact of changes in the ice cap in Antarctica, but also the Southern Ocean around it on the world climate. Beyond Epica project as well, focused on ice cores. And this enables us to study cores that are over 1.5 billion years old. And we're also developing a pan-Arctic observation system. So this is just a sample of some of the many projects that we've had. We are strengthening our cooperation with Martina, with Switzerland, in particular with the Paul-Émile-Victor Polar Institute. And these projects that we are working on all together will enable us to find solutions. I would also like to cite collaboration with different laboratories that work on knowledge collection, in particular CNRS, Canadian laboratories, in particular the Takuvik Laboratory and the University of Laval. Also a partnership with l'Ifremer in France and the University of Laval, which is operating through structures like Amun Dan Science to work on scientific activities in collaboration, focusing on ice. And this will enable us to create significant tools and systems for studying ice. This will enable us to expand our partnerships and our fields of research with regard to the poles, to share data on a European scale and an international scale. This summit will enable us to encourage this international cooperation in this field, which is essential for the future of our planet. And thanks to the synergies between science and collaborative efforts among us all, we will now be able to build on the sustainable resilience of the cryosphere so that it can play its role for a sustainable society. And I think that this collaborative work is recognized by all of you to be essential. And I would like to thank you all for your participation.
Madame la Ministre, I'll ask Christophe Béchu, Minister de la Transition écologique et de la Cohésion des territoires, de nous délivrer un petit discours de 3 minutes. 3 minutes. Non, pardon.
Si je n'ai que 3 minutes, ce sera, mesdames et messieurs, en vos grades, titres et qualités respectifs, plutôt que d'égrener la longue liste des responsabilités que je dois évoquer. Mes collaborateurs ne m'en voudront pas de ne pas lire le discours qu'ils m'ont préparé, qui dure plutôt 6 ou 7.
I would just like to say thank you very much for listening without naming everyone. Ladies and gentlemen, it is a good thing that this first summit is held alongside the Peace Forum, because the reality is we are at the convergence of an incredible climate challenge with glaciers and poles that are the first victims of climate deregulation, because in a way they are the water supply for our planet and they regulate our temperatures, and they are making our difficulties worse as they are put in danger. As these spaces become accessible to mankind, there is a risk that they become a new zone for geopolitical conflict because of where they are. There are trade routes that will be freed up as the ice melts. There will be mining rights that will be opened up. So the perspective of conflict or the installation of weapons in these zones means that we're not only looking at an environmental challenge, but also we have to preserve and protect humanity by protecting peace in these regions. Much has been said already about the reality of life on these poles and how quickly climate change is occurring on the problems that are being experienced currently with the melting of the ice-covered areas in the poles at a very rapid pace. This is something that we know from explorers, from NGOs, from people who work on these bases that are located at the polar regions. So clearly, an international response is required. The consequences of inaction will be dizzying. There's, first of all, the human realities that we can measure. 11% of the population of the planet lives in low-level coastal zones. 10% lives in high mountain areas. As the poles melt, the acceleration of glacier melt will contribute to the rising of the sea level, and hundreds of millions of inhabitants will lose their access to fresh water because glaciers supply 20% of the drinking water to people around the world. So we can see that there is an urgency. We need to work to help these different zones. And if we have budgetary efforts to make, they must be associated or set off against the cost of inaction. The amounts to be mobilized, in particular, to ensure that we have knowledge that we can share so that we can preserve these ecosystems. We must look not only at the expenditure column, but also at what the cost would be if we do nothing. Then, secondly, we must take a close look at everything that threatens the balance of entire continents. Last March 22, there was a day consecrated to water. And here again, we have an area that we must focus on: water. And finally, we must make a link between the different subjects. The best way to prevent the melting of the ice is to be more ambitious than COP28. We can see that some people wonder if the collusions are really satisfactory. And I think the Paris Summit can make the link between this work and other works. We need to create a diplomatic effort after COP15. We need to study immediately what will happen to the ecosystems that are revealed by the withdrawal of the glaciers. These areas need to be protected. Their ecosystems must be preserved. We must act now. So we have to have policies for preservation that go into effect immediately. I tried to speak very quickly, but I think I've probably gone beyond my time limit. So I will just thank you very warmly for being here, for speaking here. I would like to thank you for everything that this work, this budget, this research, this commitments represent. And let us ensure that there is a time before and after the One Planet Summit. And with Sylvie Retailleau and President Macron, we are very committed to the successful outcomes of this summit.
Merci. Merci. Thank you so much for having respected the time. We have the immense pleasure to have the Commissioner, the European Commissioner for Innovation, Research, Culture, Education and Youth, Iliana Ivanova. As you know, EU, it's 27 countries, 27 by 3 minutes. That means you have 1 hour to speak. Yeah, no. You will do that in 7 minutes, you told me. Ali, please, welcome to our new Commissioner.
Thank you very much. Merci beaucoup, chère Madame la Ministre Taillot.
Dear Minister, dear Mr. Béchu.
And friends of our oceans and poles, ladies and gentlemen, it is an immense honor and pleasure for me to be here with you today. Imagine a world where the vast icy expanses of the Arctic and Antarctic serve not as a warning, but as a testament to our stewardship of the planet. It's a world that could be within our grasp, but only if we heed the ocean and cryosphere's tale. Their state is not just a distant concern, it is a pulse by which we can measure the future of our planet Earth. For without a thriving ocean, we stand to lose more than just picturesque landscapes or the fulfillment of our climate or biodiversity goals. We risk our very survival. Today at the One Planet Polar Summit, we gather not only to discuss, but also to act, guided by the beacon of science in protecting the most vulnerable regions of our planet. The climate crisis has not been a silent adversary. The ocean and the cryosphere have borne the brunt, undergoing rapid and accelerating transformations. These changes will affect all species and living habitats on the planet. We know that coastal communities, including indigenous communities in the Arctic, will have to face rising sea levels, changing weather patterns, more extreme weather events, permafrost thawing, and release of greenhouse gases and various pathogens. But amidst these challenges, we find our resolve, for we have always been guided by the lantern of science. The European Union's dedication to understanding these profound changes is unwavering. Our dedication is twofold: to fortify our global scientific foundations and to forge new pathways in addressing the emerging threats of our time. By supporting informed decision-making, our research is really the bedrock upon which we build strategies to mitigate and adapt to climate change, all while preserving the health of the polar regions. The transformative agenda of the European Green Deal is not merely an aspiration, but a reality being shaped by our endeavors. We offer up transparent, comprehensive and meticulously balanced scientific insights, fueling policies with the power of science. The EU contribution resonates through the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change and through pivotal ocean and cryosphere observation networks worldwide. EU-funded projects are at the forefront, delivering not just data, but actionable forecasts, early warnings, in-depth assessments. These projects stand as guardians of the cryosphere's integrity and the ocean's vitality. Our commitment obviously extends beyond research. It is about fostering dialogue, building bridges between nations, stakeholders, and also with indigenous communities, whose traditional knowledge is invaluable in our collective quest for sustainability. Our Horizon 2020 program and our Horizon Europe, with an investment of 372 million for Arctic research, 115 million euro for Antarctic and Southern Ocean, and 140 million on advancing and financing polar science, reflect this commitment to generating knowledge that informs policy and spurs innovation. Take, for instance, the EU-funded Nunatsiaq project. Just last month, it unveiled the Arctic Permafrost Atlas, offering unprecedented insight into how the thawing of permafrost affects human communities in the Arctic. The European Union has set up the world's largest consortium of polar research expertise and infrastructures, the EU Polar Cluster. Our ambitions are embodied in the EU mission, Restore Our Ocean and Waters by 2030, spearheaded by Pascal Lamy, whom we are honored to have with us today. The mission sets out to restore the health and natural capital of the hydrosphere as a whole. And by the end of 2024, the mission will deliver a prototype digital twin of the ocean, placing the wealth of oceanic and polar knowledge at our fingertips. Our partnerships and joined-up initiatives include the Horizon Europe Sustainable Blue Economy Partnership, where the Commission and the EU member states are pooling 450 million euros investment in marine and maritime research. The Joint Earth System Science Initiative with European Space Agency, and the All-Atlantic Ocean Research and Innovation Alliance, that is forging connections on global scale. Ladies and gentlemen, within our research portfolio, programs and partnerships, we are charting a course that not only seeks to understand and to protect our cryosphere, but also prepares our communities for the transformations ahead. As we stand on the brink of the future, let us join efforts to safeguard our planet. Together, we can forge a legacy that future generations will look back upon, knowing that when called upon, we rose as stewards of our Earth. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much. Now it's time for science. So we have two scientists who represent the community. Please, Antje Botius, Jérôme Chaplaz, you will deliver us the statement. What is exactly the name of these shows you are going to present?
We look at our dear ministers and call for international stewardship on behalf of the cryosphere.
Okay. You like it? If you like it, I have no choice. Please, start. Normally you have 15 minutes. If you can do that in 12, that's better.
Yeah, I think we'll go for 30.
9 for
Can I get the microphone?
Yeah, you want to?
Yeah,
please.
Yeah.
Merci, c'est gentil.
And if we could have the slides. Yes, so we have met here at the summit all together to discuss the cryosphere, so the frozen part of our planet. And as you have just heard, this idea that science approaches policy, politics, and asks for international stewardship is inspired by knowing that some actions that we need are incredibly long-term, and we will come to that in a moment. That's what we mean by stewardship, something that goes much beyond election terms. And it is important to do that to limit impacts from melting ice.
So on these fuzzy photos, you see those who have started the work with us. That's the Science Advisory Board that came from all over the world, from Australia, from India, from China, from the US, from Canada, from France, from Brazil, from Germany, from Norway. Sorry. And some are in the room, if they want to stand, of course. I think we have Jefferson here, Nicole, Valérie Masson-Delmotte is here, Liz Andreasen should be here, Liz, Jennifer Mercer should be here. Where is Jennifer? Okay, we have Jennifer as well. And some of those, unfortunately, couldn't join us. But more than this Science Advisory Board, we had some people who decided at very short notice to help us. And you have the pictures here. So in addition to Nicole and Jefferson, we had Jane Francis from the UK, director of the British Antarctic Survey, Marcel Babin from Takuvik in Canada, Christopher Byrne, the head of the International Permafrost Association in Canada, and Claire Thread from Alfred Wegener Institute in Germany. And with all of them, we've been able to set up a statement.
Yes, and we would like to start with some important data observations that we would like to bring forward. We have discussed ice sheets, glaciers, and sea level. We have discussed sea ice, ocean, life, and atmosphere, and we've discussed permafrost and the associated georisks. But that you understand what we mean by we have to talk about long-term actions. This is a famous graph that describes where we are today with the global mean sea level change relative to 1900. And what you see is this black line of observation, that's what we know, and then you see several colored lines, that is our future. And it is reported by the IPCC report, as you know, that we ourselves as humans decide our future by deciding how we emit greenhouse gases to the atmosphere. And to know that governments, people, industries of today have a long-term impact much beyond hundreds and hundreds of years of the questions, where will people live in the future, which species will survive, is a new situation to human decision-making on Earth.
This graph shows you what matters in terms of glaciers in the mountains. The round parts shows you the size of the glaciers in the world, in different regions. I would say a normal cycle is about 10,000 cubic kilometer of ice. And the part you see in blue in each of this cycle is what has been lost between 2000 and 2020. Because of the global warming we have already today, 1.2 degrees Celsius, we are committed to see more. But we can still act to make that part of the white cycles is not affected.
And it is very important for you to understand what is new here. We came together both from the poles and the high mountain regions, and to know that someone who comes from Peru, someone who comes from Nepal, we all have the same urge in dealing with this committed change of the cryosphere. That shows you that the whole theme is in the center of our actions and not about fringe environments. In the sea ice, we have heard new data, and you can see that on the left side. We have a direct, surprisingly direct relationship between the loss of sea ice and the ton of CO2 emissions. And when you follow the line and the graph, you can see at what point of emissions we will have an increasing likelihood of having months and months of extra months of sea ice-free Arctic potential with all the risks for life. On the right side, you see something that was all over the media of the past 2 years, the incredible loss of sea ice from Antarctica, something that was not predicted, something that we cannot explain with our current models, something that we have to solve because it directly implicates and was observed as a loss in the reproduction of, for example, penguins. Another very surprising fact, and this is so important about the symposium, we have not only discussed climate and physics, we have discussed that the cryosphere hosts a unique biodiversity, not only of penguins, whales, krills, but also about unicellular life. What you see here is the global data on samples of microbes, and this cloud of blue points is all the knowledge we have about their genomes, their information with which they run planet Earth. When you look at the temperature distribution of the microbes, you see that the polar ones have their own world. They are unique, and they live only in those places where it's cold. So the threat of losing biodiversity and genomic information at an unprecedented pace, that is what we have discussed.
In addition to the impact of ice sheets, glacier on sea level and water resources, on what Antje just mentioned about the life in the ocean and the impact of sea ice, we discussed a lot about permafrost as well, and associated so-called georisk. What you have here is just a single point. It's called Stokes Point in Western Canada, and you see every 20 years the loss of coastal line. 0.4 meter per year in the 70s, 0.8 meter per year in the 90s, 2 meters per year in the early 2000s, 7.6 meters per year over the last 10 years. And this is growing. And this is a carbon bomb, because permafrost overall includes something like twice the amount of carbon we have in the atmosphere today.
So a few words, Jérôme, about the progress that we discussed together from the summit.
Yes, we had, I mean, the meeting was a bit puzzling because we already wrote a draft statement, but I must say it was very productive. And something which is very strong is, for the very first time, we've put together the communities working in polar regions and high altitude. And that's, I think, a strength we have to improve in the future, and especially that provides the possibility to give a voice to countries which have not so much of a voice when we speak to high latitudes. I speak, for instance, about Nepal and Peru that were represented here. Yeah, I think we'll skip the rest for the sake of time.
We have, from the 3 breakout sessions where many scientists were connected, we have first agreed on the key points we want to make today. You have already heard it from the ministers also speaking before us, that the one big solution we have to work on is to achieve the goals of the Paris Climate Agreement. Nothing else will help us as much, nothing else is so in reach, nothing else is so cost-friendly than decreasing the global greenhouse gas emissions. And that was reiterated over and over again, also by the APEX, the representation of young early career polar scientists. We'll have to address the cryosphere feedback mechanisms because, for example, the carbon bomb in the permafrost may actually reduce our abilities. When we save CO2 emissions, then that is hard for some. That may easily be paid back by nature itself because there are really unfortunate feedback mechanisms. We need to observe this. We need long secured support of having these investigations, and we go much beyond, and that was also clearly expressed, much beyond natural sciences only, because to understand the socio-economical dimension of melting ice, to include it in our risk management, in the addressing of loss and damage costs, the solidarities with those that are hurt the most, those are key actions that from all 3 breakout groups we have addressed.
One additional point we have to address is what we do with the cryosphere ecosystems. We observe more and more deglaciated areas that are so far not handled economically and politically speaking, and we have to go for international regulation to protect this kind of new ecosystems. In addition, the community has quite a lot of idea about how to address the big unknowns that are still there. We will address a few of them in the next few minutes. And we call for help from the governments to help us set up these international scientific initiatives that will require to put together lots of means in a coordinated manner. Last but not least, I think we have to show the example. Science in polar regions, maybe less in high mountain regions, is impactful. It leads us to burn a lot of fossil fuel, and we have to find ways to make it more environmental friendly. And something on which we have to make progress is sharing of infrastructures, sharing of data. That's absolutely essential.
So now just a few points, few further observations from the work on ice sheets, glaciers, water cycle and sea level. The one big message is sea level projections are key to adapting, and the uncertainties that we have we cannot afford. So to understand better and project better the sea level we have to expect by our actions of today, please understand that it matters globally because so many people live around the coasts. Ice-ocean interactions, there are so many of them. So the warming ocean actually is key in changing sea level rise. And understanding this to improve future projections of Greenland and Antarctic ice loss is key to understanding the future. The ice itself, the ice we have on land, is our climate archive. It has helped us so far to understand these strange points in the Earth system where it has different stabilities and different risks. We are going to lose archives of our past as humans and of the long-term past that we need to understand.
Water resources. It was already said, I guess, and we speak about 2 billion inhabitants of this planet who rely on the water coming from the mountains and from the glaciers. We already see on one of the presentations we got from China that some of the catchment areas are on a downward trend. That means water is already retreating in terms of amount available for the population. And that's a major concern for these populations. Hazards, it was a very important topic we addressed as well, especially related with permafrost. We see new risk because of rock falls. We see new risk with glaciers as well because of the lake formation of proglacial lakes in front of the glacier or over the glacier, creating immense floods that can impact the populations with potentially hundreds to thousands of casualties when this happens. Ecosystems, maybe you want to take the ecosystem?
In all of this, there is also a unique habitat on Earth. So when glaciers retreat, you have new landscapes. Often they look really rough. We had some amazing images of what happens then. And there are all kinds of invasive species coming up, changing biodiversity. And to understand this, to observe this, and to even prevent it, to protect glacier ecosystems, we need better collaboration. All of that is part of our action plan with major challenges that need to be tackled by a lot of complementary expertise and a lot of international interaction to work together. And this is similar in some ways on the conclusions and recommendations from the working group on sea ice, ocean atmosphere and life in the Arctic and Antarctic. The need for presence out there, the need for infrastructure to observe sea ice, oceans, the biosphere and atmosphere together is key to all of us. And many countries are stepping up their activities. Many countries have stepped up to say, we have the brilliant young talents who need access to infrastructure, so you have to open them, the countries that have enough. I would not like to read to everything, but point out to you that in the polar regions, as well as on the mountain realms, we have unique biota, life, from the unicellular to the large organisms that have no other place to go. The polar, the cold adapted life has a shrinking habitat to a speed that we are endangering species, and that again has been unprecedented, and that needs to be tackled by protection. So from science, we recommend to engage and increase the ambition on protecting the environment, which needs science, but it also needs action, and it needs to involve and respect the self-organization of indigenous communities, of local communities, so would be the best one to help with protection.
Permafrost and georisk, we may not go in detail in reading all of that, but a few bullet points I think you can take afterwards. This community working on permafrost stresses these 4 bullet points. They are quite important. We need to reopen access to all areas where permafrost matters. And we all have in mind, of course, what happened with Russia. 50% of the Arctic is Russian Arctic. And a large part of the carbon bomb I mentioned is in the Russian permafrost. So we have to find ways to ease again collaboration with Russia on that matter. Establish a permanent management base for the global permafrost data repository. For other topics related with the cryosphere, the data handling is pretty good, but for permafrost there is a big effort to do to make it better. We need to engage people, especially from the permafrost regions, on all aspects of the research here. Quite often, research on permafrost is conducted by people who don't live in permafrost areas, and we have to engage, including the indigenous communities, in this monitoring effort. And last but not least, determine the cost of permafrost thaw for agencies and communities. That brings us to the question of loss and damages. Having a leveraging tool, because we have put a cost next to the loss of permafrost, it will be something very important for the policy making.
Right, and so end with this call for international stewardship once more, because when you take all of that together as the action of today that determines the future, and for that we need your support. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Great. NGOs now. Geneviève. Can I invite also Ole Olsvik, if he's here? He will say a few words just to say perhaps, Ole. Je vais lui laisser la parole et puis comme ça. Ole, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for this invitation as well, and for the platform to speak on behalf of indigenous people of North Greenland. And I might reflect on other indigenous people in the Arctic as well, because this is a start where you are inclusive in terms of indigenous people in cryospheric areas. And it has been a big weight for me to come here, and I'm emotional to be invited as well, and representing directly my people in North Greenland. I'm really proud of that. And yeah, and I would like to address the fact. Yeah, I would like to address the fact that, reflecting on what was said on prior, the first 2 days, the inclusion of indigenous people and how we can share the knowledge between civil organizations, the governments and nations, and across the border, the way of sharing knowledge that we are trying to do as well in Greenland. We have organizations as ICC, if you heard of. It's Inuit Circumpolar Council, who's working on addressing the fact that we have to have connection across the borders and sharing the knowledge that we have from the old knowledge and the new ways the young generation has learned now. But I would like to, in the end, I would like to say we should all share the knowledge that we have, and because we have, when everyone is gone in the middle of the polar nights where I'm from, there's no one else that visits, but we live there. We live there all year around, and it reflects on the rest of the world as well for indigenous people. So I know most of the local communities, they want to adapt. They need the necessities of adapting with the changes that come with the weather and the ice and the water. So yeah, I would like to propose that we work with more local communities and indigenous people and include them for summits like this as well. And I'm looking forward to that. Thank you so much.
Merci. Thank you. Geneviève Ponce, thanks so much for your commitment. You have been working a lot since September, so please deliver your statement.
Thank you very much, Olivier.
5 minutes you have.
5?
5, yeah.
Too much.
Too much. Excellent. I love you.
Merci, Olivier. Okay, so dear ministers, dear Olivier, dear Pascal, and dear all, I will try to be even shorter than what Olivier allows me. I think that the NGO communities and indigenous populations have made a tremendous work in a very, very short time period. We were asked to do so very lately. We were not supposed at the beginning to be part of this summit. but when we were invited, we were mobilized. And we insisted in having more indigenous people being there. And I think that we did rightly so, and we obtained it. I will make 4 points, hopefully in less than 5 minutes. So first, figures, second, emotions, and then demands. Before conclusion, because I see I have 3 of them. So first, figures. I will be very short. We had a lot of very, very worrying figures. Just to remember that Arctic is, the temperature in Arctic is warming 4 times more rapidly than elsewhere. In Antarctic, it's 2 times more rapidly than elsewhere. And also, as far as glaciers are concerned, they have lost 30 meters since 1970, which means that some of them have already disappeared. And with them, a lot of economic activities and also cultural identity. Then emotions. Emotions were shared by these indigenous people suffering before us all, their friends, their brothers, sisters, human beings. They are suffering much quicker than us and much harder than us of the consequences of climate change. And we had people from the Himalayan countries coming to tell us about their experience, terrible experience. We had people from Andean countries who shared also the loss of glaciers, the loss of water, the loss of life, the loss of their identity and spirituality. And finally, as you have seen, we have people from Greenland who came to share their experience with us. So a lot of emotions, and I'm very, very glad that they were able to come and that we insisted for that and obtained it. And then we have requests. First of all, implement already concluded agreements, and especially the Paris Agreement, with the engagement of maintaining the rise of temperature to 1.5 degrees. I was in Paris, I fought for that. I was heading WWF European office at that time. I know that it is not the exact wording of the Paris Agreement, but it is extremely important to stick to 1.5 degrees. And I think it was a person from UNESCO came to share with us his knowledge about World Heritage glaciers. If we stick to 1.5, 2/3 of these World Heritage glaciers are saved. If we don't, they will disappear. Of course, safeguard of marine and terrestrial protected areas will help also. So that's the first point, stick to the already concluded agreements, but also reinforce the protection of the cryosphere zones, especially against activities which are growing like transports or which are envisaged like mining. And still 2 recommendations. First of all, monitor and report, and we should make a link between this summit and UNOX 3 in June 2025. Last but not least, engage more than so far with indigenous people. You have heard to Ole Olsvig. We have heard also to people from Himalaya and Andean countries. We know that they are suffering, but we know also that they have a knowledge and a wisdom that we should listen to. Thank you for your attention.
Merci Geneviève. Alors, où est le grand Yann? Ah voilà. Yann, tu es tout seul ou tu es avec...
Yen, you have the floor. And Jennifer is also invited.
Hi, everybody. We are to deliver the statement for the operators. So, Mr. Ministries and dear guests, dear everybody, I'm Yann Robert-Couder, Director of the French Polar Institute, and
I'm Jennifer Mercer. I'm the head of Arctic Sciences at the U.S. National Science Foundation, and I'm also the chair of FARO, which is the Forum of Arctic Research Operators.
And as Olivier did not give us any time limit, I guess we have all the afternoon to speak.
Okay, and we have your notes on it.
And I have my notes here, don't worry. I had my notes, here they come. Okay, now we're going to be very short and very to the point because we are operators, so we are very pragmatics. You've heard about the science. The science is a key to our future, to understand what's going on in the poles, in the glaciers. So our message is super clear. No support, no science. So if you don't have the operators behind the scientific, there's no science happening. Just one striking number. For one scientific person deployed in the Antarctic, you have 9 operators working in the back. So that gives you an idea of how much background work is done on the topic. We have principles that we would like to share with you, explaining who we are, how we work. The first of it is that our primary concern is the safety of people. We are not putting the scientists at risk. We are developing safety measures. We are developing safety stations so that they can work in a safety environment. We are also concerned about the impact we have in the places we work. We don't go to Antarctica because we don't care about Antarctica. It's because we care about it, or I say Antarctica because you've heard, you guess that I'm someone from the Antarctic, but it's equally true for the Arctic or the glaciers. When we go to work there, it's because we care for these places. And so we have to commit to be leader in the way we manage our infrastructures, in the way we manage our assets, so that they don't impact further the environment. And to do that, our third principle is that we are very involved into innovations and technological innovation especially, because that's the key for us to be efficient in what we do, and again, to be less, I would say, impactful on the environment. And finally, the last principle I would like to mention here, which is a key for many of these places, it's international collaboration. We are all here to testimony the fact that we cannot work in these places if we're not working together, whether we are scientists, NGOs, or operators like us. And for this, we have some recommendations, and I will let Jennifer speak about them.
Yes, thank you. So we have summarized everything into a few recommendations. And polar data acquisition, whether it's collected on the ground or through satellites, through analysis and modeling, is only possible through the nexus of scientists and operators that rely on practical, technical, and non-political expertise through regional, national, and international support networks. So these recommendations include actively promoting the continuing collaborative work. It's a theme, I think we're hearing, the collaboration. Continuing the collaborative work of countries to undertake the science and science support that will fill our knowledge gaps related to changes in the oceans and cryosphere. Increasing the investments into modernization of polar stations and activities and our assets, infrastructure assets. And these investments in the short term, while they may be large, they will have significant long-term paybacks. The third one is increasing investments in people, the scientists and the operators, in the infrastructure and assets that I just spoke about that will enable implementation of the critical science required. And in this regard, increasing stable and permanent professional positions for early career people, and that will help to secure the long-term science and science support needed to answer our critical societal questions and facilitate the translation of scientific results to policy actions. Promoting shared use of stations is the fourth one. Shared use of stations, infrastructure, activities, and vessels to help limit more infrastructure building or the artificialization of the polar regions. And then finally, to recommit to the intrinsic and wilderness values of the polar regions by prioritizing environmental protection values.
Thank you.
Yeah.